Good morning. I'm going to try another one of these COVID video log reports over some coffee, just some coffee thoughts. And today's is all about the source of truth, because I know that everybody wants to know where the source of truth is. And whether you're the developer or the designer or the PM or somebody that wants to contribute, your goal is to contribute to the place where the source is, where the truth is, where you can make the highest impact and have it sort of trickle down throughout the rest of the system. I think that's what people's intent is when they say the source of truth, is they want to go work on the core, the thing that is sort of supplying values to everything else. And anyway, so I have a big issue with the source of truth, because I've gone through many phases of assuming what the source of truth was, or discovering or thinking I knew what the source of truth was. And sometimes, like let's say I'm in a design mentality, I might think the source of truth is my design file. Which it can be in cases where maybe it's employing design tokens, or it's sort of the main place that everyone goes to talk about what the future of this design is going to be. But that design file is not the source of truth, because when you go visit the product, whatever it is that you're building, web, native, it doesn't matter. The source of truth is not your design file. The source of truth to most people is the thing that they're using in their hands. And so you get this sort of, okay, well, if it's not my design file, maybe my design file has pieces of the source of truth. It is not the source of truth. So then folks start to think about, well, maybe my code is the source of truth. And this is often where I think most people's brains are today when they're thinking about the source of truth, is my code, my repository, my source folder is my source of truth. In fact, my source folder with all the variables and tokens and data and stuff that I'm sticking in there, that's my source of truth. This is what, when I compile it and I build it, my site, my application gets built. And that means this is my source. This is my tightest, like, zipped source, and then I'll expand it and deploy it and send it other places and have it be dynamic and render, a user's profile page that I don't have to pre-render. I get to do that dynamically. And yes, I think this is a source of truth, about as much source of truth as a design file. I think that code is an interesting way to store sources of truth. Well, here's my opinion on it. I think it's the strongest, most succinct way to store the source of truth, which is, brand assets, things about your company, your business logic, your tokens, your colors, like all of the stuff that we think of as in a style guide or in a design system. All of this stuff is essentially kind of a source of truth. But in my opinion, the source of truth that you have there is only contextual to the one place it's being deployed. So this is where I need you to sort of like think a little higher level about what's going on when you deploy, like, let's say your Android application. The Android source code is not the source of truth for your business. It is and this is where we start to get into my philosophies, and this is my coffee thinkings on this whole subject, is those are a implementation of the source of truth. Your Android app and your iOS app and your web app are all different versions and interpretations of your source of truth. They're implementations of it, in that they are translating your source of truth, which, wherever that is, right? Your source of truth is influencing these implementations. Now, these implementations have to live inside of a different world than wherever it was that the source of truth is. The source of truth has to live higher level than a platform. It can't be, because you might eventually be on a watch, you might eventually be on a tablet, you might eventually be on a big screen. There's all these different places where your business and your logic can live, and you can't be dependent on a platform. So your components can't even be platform dependent. You can't have your Android tabs is not how your tabs should look on iOS and on the web. Those should get native interpretation, something that when that user visits that particular platform implementation, they get a unique, well, they don't get a unique, they get a non-unique, often, component, something very familiar to them, something that came with the platform. And this is a push and a pull that your design system, your source of truth, kind of has to have with the environment that it lives in. So that's what I like about thinking of a source of truth. I don't think we have one of those yet, and I'll go into one that I think is the closest source of truth we have right now. But most of these things that we do is we deploy implementations that are the most of our understanding that we have of our design system melded and hybrided into the world at which they need to live. And this is why I think most of the things that we send around in our design systems and our source of truth are really small and atomic, because they travel well. Like a color, a hex code can travel around these different platforms really well. Some spacing kind of starts to struggle right away, right? If your source of truth is 12 pixels, well, then you're going to have a hard time interpreting that and translating that to somewhere else where pixels might not be the native language there. Okay, so sources of truth. I don't think we have one yet. I don't think anybody has, because I think your source of truth is not in any implementation. I think as soon as you point to an example and you say, here, this website has our design system, this is our source of truth, I go, I don't think so. I think that's the source of truth that's living on your site. That's the most up-to-date understanding of what you have in terms of a design system. I don't think that's bad. I think it's really good. I just think that what we need to do is create something higher level where the design system primitives and these tokens and these little atomic values, or even start to get into like things like business logic, can trickle down into the other platforms and truly be shared. At which point you'll have an abstract design system, a design system and a source of truth that is agnostic to implementation. And that's what I think that's what we have to get to eventually, is we need a CMS that manages our business logic, our colors, and all this stuff that needs to be shared. And then we can take these things, these expressions and these tokens, and use them inside of the platforms, and then render and display something that's very native in touch and feel, but is following the business logic and is leveraging all the tokens that we have from that's coming up top from this other system. So for me, in my current understanding of what people mean by source of truth, I think what they're actually referencing is this their code, which is a valid implementation source of truth for that one platform, but I don't think it is the source of truth. I also I think that code is, unfortunately, and I say that because not very many people can contribute to code, so it's kind of an obnoxiously efficient way of stashing our styles, or not our styles, just stashing our sort of business logic, is that it's hard for other people to contribute to, and I want many people to be able to contribute into this agnostic and abstract concept of a source of truth. Like people should be able to talk about your brand and the business requirements and the tokens that are inside of it without knowing the implementation details. And so that's what's important about whatever system that eventually gets made, is you need to make it so lots of people can contribute. It needs to be pretty finite, so it's probably going to look something close to code. And if you have seen sketch.systems, I think that's sort of an interesting take on, or even cucumber tests, where people are writing their like BDD tests in a very natural way. I like these because they sort of encourage other people to come in and contribute, and they're code-esque. And so someone might be able to make a translation layer that sort of turns that into some tighter code. So anyway, my weird opinion is I think that our design systems are still kind of failing us in that they need to be higher level, they need to be abstracted and have nothing to do with any implementation details, so they shouldn't know what a tab or a button is. Your design system, your source of truth, should describe the behavior that you need out of a tab or a button. So anyway, sources of truth, I don't think we've found one yet. I think we're still struggling to get there, and I think what we need to do is extract even more out of our design systems and make them even more atomic. And so that brings me to my last little point here, which is the closest thing I've seen to an agnostic design system, something that is a source of truth of anyway, is the Tailwind object that you get to modify in order to build out a Tailwind library for yourself. So Tailwind comes by default with something that's very, very nice. Call it Bootstrap-esque if you want, but I think it's better than that. Anyway, what's interesting about what they give you is that instead of you going into a Bootstrap Sass file and modifying a bunch of variables that then build out a Sass file, what you get is a JavaScript object. And what's interesting about having a JavaScript object is you can iterate over it, you can map, you can filter, you can go grab data from a remote location and merge it and converge it with this, and then iterate out and build out a design CSS file. You could also, here's where I'm getting at, notice how what we did with this abstract tokened JavaScript object was we outputted CSS. Well, what if we took the same object and we output some native styles, some native layers that we could compose inside of Objective-C or inside of Android? So that way we're taking what this is, which is the most reduced type of units that we want to talk about in our system. And then we distribute those out to become something more of a richer meaning in the native platforms at which they need to live. So anyway, I hope you had fun with this little coffee thought. This coffee thought is, I still don't think we have a source of truth. I don't think designers have it. I don't think coders have it. I don't think anyone has it. I think it's still floating in fragments across a bunch of different minds. And what we tend to do is we tend to think our code is king, and code is often king. I gotta say, code is very solid at doing this job of like letting us articulate succinctly and then execute and get expected results. I think it's doing that really well. But we need to get it into a spot where it's not so tied to the place that it renders and the place that it lives. And we need more contributors to get into that, because otherwise we're going to see just more of what we have now, which is kind of a fragmented set of design systems where our Android and our iOS and our web don't really behave the same or look the same. And they have no ethos or soul that's tying them all together. You might have pieces, but we're still fragmented. And I think it's because we treat certain things as too much of the source of truth. So my warning at the end of this video is beware of what you're calling the source of truth. I think the journey to get one and to find it is awesome, and I hope we eventually get there. But these are my coffee thoughts on this Monday about sources of truth. I think that we got work to do, y'all.